Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I would do a follow-up video to the previous video I had done on OnAir Airline Manager, a career mode add-on for Microsoft Flight Simulator as well as other flight simulators. I'm planning on talking about three primary topics today, and I'll break apart the video timeline below so you can jump around to whatever topics are of most interest to you. The big thing I wanted to talk about is a comparison of different heavy jet types. Here you can see the aircraft usage tree that shows the most popular planes for each category. I thought I'd go through and compare some of the most popular heavy jets as well as some of the ones that just came out for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Something to keep in mind is that if you are using AI pilots, you don't actually have to use the planes that are exclusive to your flight sim. So if you only have Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can still use the X-Plane 11 planes with your AI pilots. You just won't be able to fly them in the game. So I've got four charts to talk about, each covering the 7 planes you can see here on the right. I've got the 777F cargo, 3 from X-Plane 11, the A380, the AN225, and the A350, 2 from Microsoft Flight Simulator, the 747 and the 787, and 1 from FSX, the 787. So the first chart is covering an overview of payload versus range. This is really just a snapshot of how far any of these planes can travel depending on how much cargo payload they are carrying. These charts can be calculated using the spreadsheet I linked to in my last video, and I'll put that link down below again. So note that you can actually download that spreadsheet so that you can edit it. Even though you can't edit it in Google Drives, you can download it so you can edit it. So what we see here is that some of the planes can carry a lot of cargo a long distance, like the AN225 and the 777 cargo, whereas others can only carry a large amount of cargo for a short distance, like the 747. You can also tell there's a difference between the same plane in two different versions of the game, the Microsoft Flight Simulator and the FSX version of the 787. So even though the stats of the two are the same for things like maximum payload and empty weight, they do have different speeds and fuel consumption rates, and also costs that we'll see later on. So that results in different curves. So you can pause the video here if you want to see this chart any further. I won't go too much more into it, but I think it's nice to see the different capabilities of the different planes. So it's one thing to be able to carry a lot of payload a long distance, but it's another to do it economically. This chart shows the approximate rental cost of each of these planes per pound of cargo based on the distance you are flying. So this includes the rental fee, the fuel, and the pilots. This chart does assume two things. First, that the planes are fully loaded with no empty space. And second, to get the rental fees for each of these, what I did was I took a look at the third cheapest options available within 1,000 miles of Kansas City. So that should get a large portion of like the US and parts of Canada and Mexico, and rounded the values I found there. So I took the third cheapest option just to make sure I didn't get any outliers. But just so you know, the prices here are on the low end for each plane. So the chart, the cost on the left might be a little low. Just depends on what type of plane you're in. So here you can see that the FSX version of the 787-10 is the most economical in this category. And then most of the planes, most of the rest of them are reasonably comparable. And then there's the 747 from Microsoft Flight Sim. That is a very expensive outlier. So again, you can pause it if you want to take a look. It's cost per payload to move at a certain distance. This third chart is showing the same thing as the previous chart, but instead of listing rental fees, it's a cost of owning the plane plus the cost of fuel. So it's the ownership cost plus the fuel. You can see the trends are really nearly identical between the two graphs, but the values are an order of magnitude lower for the owned chart than the rental chart. For the ownership cost, really all that was factored in is the weekly ownership cost here. You can find it on the aircraft details page. It's really the only one of these costs that matters too much. I assumed that you use a plane for about 40 hours a week. That might be low or that might be high based on how you're playing, but that's how I ended up doing the calculations. It was the same for each of the planes. The annual checkup price, the 100 hours checkup price, the engine price over 3,000 hours, none of these matter. when you're really doing like the cost calculations. The one that really matters is the weekly ownership cost. So what does this all mean? The last chart I've got here compares the cost to actually purchase each of these planes compared to how much cargo they can carry a certain distance. I've mentioned how maintenance costs don't really matter that much in general, but the cost to purchase a plane can be substantial. So what this chart is trying to do is compare all of these planes to the FSX version of the 78710. You can compare it to any one you want, but I had to pick a baseline, so that's the one I used. So what you're looking at here, all of these calculations were the cost of the 787 divided by the cost of the other plane, and then that multiplied by the payload of the other plane divided by the payload of the 787 at the same range. So a value greater than 1 here indicates that it is cheaper to buy the other plane to move the same relative amount of cargo for that distance, and a value of less than 1 indicates that it is more expensive to buy the other plane. So higher than 1 is a positive for that plane, and lower than 1 is a negative. So this does assume that full planes are used here again, and that I use the third cheapest option within 1,000 miles of Kansas City. So for example, the 777 cargo here and the FSX 787 compare almost identically at a range of 4,000 nautical miles. That's this point right here. But the 787 is less economical to purchase if you're doing shorter trips, and more economical for longer trips compared to the 777. So the Microsoft Flight Sim version of the 787 is very economical to purchase due to its low purchase price, but what isn't shown here is that it is relatively slow compared to the other planes. So it's hard to come to a conclusion based on just a handful of graphs here, and as I just mentioned with the 787, there are other considerations that you need to take into account, like aircraft speed, or its availability in your flight simulator if you're interested in flying it. Another consideration is flexibility. It may be better to buy 2 smaller planes than 1 larger plane so that you have more flexible delivery options. In my opinion, the FSX version of the 78710 is a great plane, and it's the one I'm planning on utilizing. But a strong case could be made for several of these. The AN225 or the Microsoft Flight Sim version of the 787 are pretty good as well. And you can see here with the planes that I'm both renting and owning, I'm using a lot of the FSX 787s here. It's really all I'm using for the heavy aircraft. So something to keep in mind is that the stats do seem to change within OnAir. Things get moderated and things get changed around based on in-game flight stats. So if that happens in the future, some of the data I've shown here may not be valid anymore. And another thing to point out while I'm here on this screen, I haven't done quite as in-depth of a look at the regular size jets as I just did with the heavy jets, but I do like the 757-200 for the smaller jets. I think it's a pretty good plane as well. So another thing I wanted to talk about was airframe time. So I am not an expert at this game, I'm pretty new to it, so I may be missing something, but from the research I've done, it appears that what the airframe time affects is the rate at which airframe condition decreases, as well as increasing the chance of engine failure. So if I go here to a list of flights for this plane, and I'll go back to the aircraft details screen to show how you can tell if it's a plane with high airframe time. But this one does have high airframe time, and you can see here after each flight, you can pull up a list of some stats on the flight. And we'll just take a look at this one here. So you can see that the normal wear and tear for the airframe condition was negative 0.42%, and because it had high airframe condition, it gets another negative 0.58%. And I looked at several different planes looking at this, and it kind of fluctuates, but it seems to be about double the normal wear and tear if it's a high airframe time plane as opposed to a normal plane. So something to keep in mind. So I'm here on the aircraft details page, and you can see that it has airframe time listed here. This plane is 54,000 and some change. And if you mouse over it, it says that it's considered high after 52,000 hours. So this plane is considered to be a plane with high airframe time on it. What I don't know is if a larger value is worse than one that is only slightly over the airframe time limit. So this one's at 54,000 and 52,000 is considered high time. I don't know if it behaves differently than a plane that's at 72,000 hours. So let me know in the comments below if you have any experience with that. From the limited amount of research I did here making this, I did not see a big difference, but let me know if you see something different. So I'm over here on the maintenance page for this 757 I own, and to repair condition fully, what you can do is do an annual checkup. And if I do an annual checkup, and if I just use the airport's FBO, not my own, if I just use the airport's, and I do an annual checkup, you see that the price is $5,000. And this is for a 757, so it'd be a little bit more expensive for a heavier jet. I think that's true. I don't have any heavy jets right now that I own that are at a base, so I can't check that at the moment. But the point I'm making here, though, is that this cost, when you're into the area of flying jets and heavy jets, this is really nothing. This is not anything at all. $4,680. I just completed a mission today that netted, well, grossed over $60 million. So $4,000 to repair a plane is not really a huge amount to worry about. So just something to keep in mind, that the bigger issue here really is probably the time that you'll be without that plane than the actual cost of the maintenance. So I've pulled up a list of all of the 787s available for sale within 1,000 miles of Kansas City, and what you can see here is that the high time airframe is 52,000 hours. The cheapest one available under that is almost 98 million, and then the next one is over 106 million. Whereas if you are willing to get one with high airframe time, you can get one as low as $69 million. You can save a lot of money by getting an older plane, and it may be in the shop more for maintenance, but it's not really going to cost a whole lot of money from what I can tell. It might be more of a time issue. So something to weigh when you're looking to buy a plane. You have to determine if it's worth it to you to spend a bit more money to get a newer plane or not based on these factors. The last thing I wanted to talk about real quick is just how I'm playing the game. I'm not suggesting that this is the correct version or the incorrect version, but you might be interested to just to see how somebody's playing it. So really what I'm doing is I have a base in different regions of the world. So I've got one here for North America, I've got one for South America, one for Europe, and so on and so forth. And what I'm doing is I'm really just running a hub and spoke system here. I've got the 787s, the heavy jets, flying from hub to hub primarily. If I see a good mission flying from just another airport to another airport, I will take it. But primarily what I'm doing with them is going hub to hub. And so my primary hub here that I've been playing out of is Fort Wayne. So I've got, there's a few planes here right now, but there's planes here in Fort Wayne. I've got big planes and small planes. And then what'll happen is the little planes will go out, bring in missions. So let's say I have cargo somewhere in Tennessee that needs to go out to Europe. I'll bring it in to Fort Wayne, and then I'll fly it over to my hub over here in France. And then from France, I will fly it out to wherever it needs to go into Europe. It's not quite as economical to do this with rented planes. Rented planes, you really need to make sure you're taking economical missions, the shortest routes possible, so that you're not paying for the rental fees. But as you start to actually start owning your own planes, it doesn't become quite as big of an issue, and it's certainly a convenience of sorts to route planes to the same locations back and forth. That way, you just kind of have a system down that you don't have to manage too much. And what's nice about having the hubs in different geographical locations is that a lot of the airport codes, the first either one or two letters, really it tells you where that airport's at. So for example, I'm here at my European hub. My European hub basically accepts any cargo that begins with an E or an L. I know those are the two European codes in use. So if I have any cargo anywhere else in the world that needs to go somewhere that starts with E or L, it just gets shipped here to this hub. And from here, I use the smaller planes to ship it out. And in some places, this is not true with places like the US, but in Europe it's true. The second letter here does also indicate location. So for example, I've got a bunch of them here with Echo Delta. This implies that they're all in Germany. So I can just load up a plane with all of these cargo if they fit and just go from airport to airport. I don't even really have to look at a map too much. I know they're all in the same relative location. Usually the last airport I go to in that chain to drop off cargo, I will go look for missions from that airport to see what the best options are, and then I'll bring that cargo back to the hub for the big planes to take on to another hub. And so really it's using the little planes to send out the cargo, bring in cargo, the big planes are sending that cargo off to the other hubs, and it's a network like that. The other nice thing about the hubs are the FBO queries, and I think I talked about this in the last one, but again, I just had one that paid like $60-some million. And it did require me to rent a few different planes in different locations to, I think I only had a few days to do it, and I was going all the way from, I think I was going from Australia to South America, and I think there were things in maybe North America. Like, it had me going all over the place, but it was worth it to rent the planes to do it. Just because of how much money some of these missions can net you. So I have almost been playing this more than Microsoft Flight Simulator lately, and I'm not really doing long distance missions in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I guess one little nit that I have, a lot of these missions require you to fly them and not an AI pilot. I don't know if it's possible in survival mode or not, but I know when you start the game, you can pick if you are basically playing Tycoon mode, where you're only using AI pilots, but once you've started your game, you can't change to that mode. So I guess what I'm getting at is I'm stuck with a lot of missions here that I'm probably never going to actually take because I'm not going to fly this mission. I might fly a smaller mission, but I just don't typically tend to fly the really long missions. So I wish that was something you could change once you've started the game, because a lot of these missions here are really, I'm never going to be able to fly them just based on the requirements here. Though having said that, it's important to look in all the missions, and you can see that only this one here requires me to fly it. So even if this icon does show up, it still may be possible to take the mission if the flight that's requiring me to fly it is a shorter flight that I'm willing to take. So I think that's all at the moment. I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you learned some stuff out of this one. I know we got into some level of detail there with the charts with the heavy jets, but I think it's important by the time you're getting up into the jets and heavy jets. I think it's important to, just if you're getting up to that point, you're probably interested in making money for your company, and just knowing what planes are more economical and how to figure that out is important. Like I said before, the spreadsheet that I had a link to in my previous video that I'll also put a link to here can be used to sort of, you can generate graphs like that. You have to do it manually, but you just put in the stats for the plane and just graph different points at different ranges with the plane, and you can do similar chart analysis there with different planes if I didn't cover one that you're interested in. So yeah, having said that, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and looking forward to the next one.